At 64 years old, Isiah Thomas is far more than a former basketball player. He stands as one of the greatest icons ever produced by the NBA, a legend whose accomplishments seem to challenge logic, rewrite history, and push beyond the natural limits of the human body. At only 6'1", in a league ruled by towering 7-foot warriors, he still rose to become the heart, the mind, and the spirit of the Detroit Pistons, a franchise that didn't simply capture championships, but reshaped how the NBA functioned. He dictated the pace. He ignited the creativity. He was the ice-cold leader who understood precisely when to show mercy and when to strike without hesitation. Back-to-back NBA championships in 1989 and 1990, a Finals MVP award, 12 All-Star appearances, and performances that analysts still point to as the ultimate standard of clutch basketball. Every piece of it reinforces his place among the greatest point guards in history. No one forgets the ankle game, the night he poured in 25 points in a single quarter on an ankle that was nearly destroyed. It was a moment that stunned America, a display of superhuman determination from a body breaking apart yet refusing to surrender. But that brilliance represents only one side of the narrative. The other side, the one the world mentions far less, is the shadow that has followed him throughout his life. That shadow was born on the west side of Chicago, where nightly gunfire echoed through the streets. It was a place where gangs battled over territory, where the death of his brother Larry carved a wound that never truly closed, and where his father's departure left behind a question that lingered endlessly. Why wasn't I enough for him to stay? Those memories are scars no championship parade could ever erase. Throughout his career, he existed in a strange duality, celebrated and condemned at the same time. Hailed as a genius, yet painted as a villain. His exclusion from the Dream Team cut deeply. The media's relentless criticism isolated him, and he was often misunderstood and pushed into corners of darkness few people ever noticed. After stepping away from the game, he endured a series of painful setbacks, from the collapse of the CBA to the public disaster surrounding the Knicks. Meanwhile, years of punishment began to betray his body as his knees, back, and ankles slowly gave way. Still, through all the suffering, one fact has remained constant. Isiah Thomas did not fall. He has never truly fallen. The will that carried him, the will of a poor kid from Chicago's West Side, the will of a man who survived violence, grief, betrayal, and relentless misunderstanding, is what defines him as a legend. Not just in basketball, but in the story of human endurance. For him, greatness is not measured by trophies lifted beneath arena lights. It is found in the power to rise again in the darkness, when no one else is watching. If you want to keep exploring the tragic yet remarkable journey of this legend, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next part of the story. And now, we step forward into another chapter of the tragedy known as Isiah Thomas. His childhood was never the gentle beginning of a feel-good sports tale. It was an immediate passage into a battleground he never chose. Chicago's West Side during the 1960s and 1970s was more than just an impoverished area. It was a community fractured by violence, where hearing gunshots at night was routine, where children barely 5 or 6 years old learned to hit the floor at the scream of sirens, and where bodies sometimes lay on street corners like discarded remnants of a broken society. For Isiah, this wasn't a distant story told by others. It was his reality, the air he breathed, the streets he walked, the nights filled with the scent of danger, clinging to every brick and shadow. His father disappeared when he was too young to fully understand the weight of that abandonment. What he did understand was simple and brutal. Survival would be his responsibility alone in a world where rescue was not coming. In a neighborhood where men either vanished or were killed, the only unwavering strength he recognized came from his mother. Mary Thomas, a woman unafraid of gangs, a mother who once stood in her doorway gripping a gun, facing down men armed with knives and declaring, "You will not take my son." Those words did more than protect Isiah in a single moment. They protected him year after year. Through endless nights when gangs attempted to pressure neighborhood kids into joining or facing consequences. Inside the Thomas home were 9 children, and poverty meant more than empty plates. It was the constant sensation of a family being pulled apart from the inside. One sibling slipping into addiction, another ending up arrested, one beaten after running with the wrong crowd, one disappearing from home, and one losing his life. Mary's children didn't experience a normal upbringing. They were dragged back and forth between violence and hopelessness. Isiah watched, powerless, as his brothers and sisters were swallowed one by a spiral, the neighborhood treated as unavoidable fate. He became familiar with the scent of cheap alcohol, the screaming that followed street fights, the crash of furniture during someone's drug withdrawal, and the hollow eyes of teenagers who had already lost their future by 14 or 15. Each day delivered a fresh lesson in the cruelty of the world. Every child around him had to make the same brutal decision: break down or survive. Yet the sharpest wound didn't come from the daily violence in the streets. It came from the murder of his brother, Larry Thomas. In 1980, Larry was savagely killed in a gang-related incident just as Isiah Thomas was beginning to surface as a rising basketball talent. That loss tore away a hidden piece of his soul, something no one watching him play could ever see. It wasn't simply the grief of losing family. It was a harsh reminder that achievement offered no shield from the merciless destiny facing those born on Chicago's West Side. For the first time, death stopped being a distant headline and became something immediate and personal. Inside his home, inside his chest. He realized that leaving the neighborhood did not mean leaving behind its suffering. Those early years molded him into a man the public could never fully comprehend. Just by watching highlights from the NBA, every struggle he faced, on the court and beyond it, was fueled by memories of a child weaving past police cars on the way to school, stepping around streets where bloodstains still lingered, and seeing his exhausted mother planted at the doorway like the final barrier against chaos. Out of that turmoil, a single truth emerged: Isiah never truly experienced childhood. What he had instead were years dedicated purely to survival. When America later saw him smiling slightly under the bright lights, his eyes sharp and focused, they couldn't see the boy behind that expression, the one who slept on the floor to stay clear of stray bullets. They didn't see the child who watched friends disappear from the neighborhood, who endured the helpless agony of his brother's death, or who witnessed his mother seem to age a decade in a single winter just to keep the family intact. His upbringing didn't merely teach him basketball skills. It trained him to fight. It taught him to conceal weakness and to understand that the world crushed children who failed to defend themselves. That is why, when he stepped into the NBA, he arrived as more than an athlete. He entered as a survivor, a genuine survivor, and survivors do not hesitate, not in the face of gangs, not against poverty, not before pain, and certainly not against any legend the NBA placed in front of him. Most Americans recognize Isiah only from the bright spotlight of the Detroit Pistons. But the deeper truth is simple. Without those brutal years spent enduring the West Side, the history of basketball would never have known Isiah Thomas, because long before he was celebrated as a legend, he first had to master the art of surviving in a place where childhood wasn't counted in years, but in the number of nights you managed to stay alive. Yet poverty and violence were not the only sources of Isiah's pain. If the West Side showed him how near death always stood, the people around him taught a different wound that lingered even longer: the ache of being invisible. Inside a crowded family, each person wrestled with hardship in their own way. One trapped in addiction, another arrested, someone running away. There was rarely space for anyone to notice the youngest boy. The smallest in every sense, Isiah was perpetually the shortest, the skinniest, the most fragile figure in a neighborhood where strength was judged by fists and raised voices. When basketball first entered his life, it didn't immediately brighten anything. Instead, it cast his doubts into sharper relief. In high school, he was ridiculed for being too undersized to fight for rebounds, too light to endure a sport dominated by players a head taller. Coaches told him bluntly, "You're too small. You won't go far." Those words clung to him like invisible scars, resurfacing every time the ball touched his hands. People saw only his limitations, never his heart. They noticed height, but missed hunger. During practice, he poured out everything he had, yet the coach's attention often drifted past him toward the bigger athletes, the ones labeled as real prospects. Isiah buried that disappointment deep inside, just as he had buried every earlier hurt. He didn't know how to express it. He had never learned to cry in front of anyone. On the West Side, showing weakness was an open invitation to danger. The fear of not being worthy enough for someone to choose him began the moment his father walked away. He was too young to grasp it intellectually, but old enough to feel the hollow space it left behind. That emptiness echoed through every later relationship, with friends, teammates, and coaches who doubted his future. It wasn't merely outside skepticism pressing on him. It was an internal battle he had to wage daily. Every joke about his size, every game where he was knocked to the floor, every whispered prediction that he wouldn't make it felt like a needle reopening that original wound. No one ever picked you. No one ever truly wanted you. What observers failed to recognize was that Isiah, though small in frame, carried a heart impossible to measure. He absorbed everything around him, sensed every slight, and suffered in ways others could not easily see. The detached expressions of coaches, the wary glances from older teammates, the rumors that his body wasn't built for college basketball, all of it accumulated and hardened into a crushing loneliness. The game that was meant to free him from the chaos outside turned into another arena of struggle. Basketball became a battlefield where his value had to be proven every second, every sprint, every dribble. No one believed in him. No one shielded him. When he fell, no one lifted him back up. He learned to do it alone. While other players returned home to applause and encouragement, Isiah went back to a house where simple survival outweighed any scoreboard result. He had no one to celebrate victories with, and no one to confess defeats to. Invisibility trailed him like a constant shadow. He grew skilled at managing pain in silence, wiping away tears on nights when no one was watching, and convincing himself that if the world refused to notice him, he would eventually compel it to look. But before he could force the world to see him, he first had to confront the fear that he was not enough. A fear rooted not in basketball, but in family. From the moment he understood that his father wasn't returning, a single thought settled deep inside him: I wasn't chosen. That realization followed him through childhood, through his teenage years, and into adulthood. It fueled his drive, yet it also remained his deepest scar. To the outside world, Isiah looked like a basketball prodigy. Inside, he still felt like the small boy in a chaotic home, gripping a basketball as if it were the final promise that life might improve. His real tragedy wasn't poverty itself. Poverty was only the scenery. The true wound was the belief that he had never mattered enough for someone to shield him, never been big enough for unwavering faith, never seemed strong enough to be considered worthy. Across those years, one painful truth echoed again and again: he was never the first choice. In love, in family, and even in basketball, he had to carve out his place with sheer will, with blood and bone. That was Isiah Thomas before legend ever touched his name. A small, abandoned boy, doubted and dismissed. yet constantly rising again because he understood something early. No one was coming to rescue him. Indiana University was not the shining dream described in romantic sports stories. For Isiah, it wasn't a smooth road to glory. It was an entrance into a furnace designed to forge steel, a place where fragile boys were broken down to build men, and sometimes their spirits cracked in the process. When he arrived in Bloomington, he carried two burdens: extraordinary basketball talent and a quiet fear that he still wasn't enough. Then he encountered Bob Knight, a man praised publicly as a genius and remembered by his players with far more complicated words: authoritarian, merciless, psychologically punishing, and for some, the figure who forced them to mature. For Isiah, Knight embodied all of those contradictions at once. Knight didn't look at him and see a struggling kid from Chicago's West Side. He studied him like raw, unshaped steel and decided that the boy would either harden into a champion or splinter under pressure. There was no middle ground. From the very beginning, Knight dismantled every comforting illusion Isiah carried with him. Compliments were rarer than gold, while shouting storms were constant. On the practice floor, Knight cursed at him, yelled in front of the entire squad, and attacked even the smallest errors. Some practices ended with Knight ripping the playbook apart and flinging it to the ground, simply because Isiah's attention drifted for a second. There were sessions where he pushed Isiah to run until he vomited, determined to prove that even gifted players must suffer like everyone else. In one especially brutal exchange, Knight fixed his eyes on Isiah, the smallest player on the roster, the one least accustomed to being valued, and declared, "If you can't survive my pressure, the NBA will kill you." It wasn't motivation. It sounded like a sentence already passed. Having grown up to the rhythm of gunfire, Isiah did not fear physical pain. What terrified him was disappointment, the possibility of being abandoned again. He feared that if Knight lost faith in him too, it would confirm the suspicion haunting him since childhood, that he would never measure up. There were afternoons when he sat alone in his dorm room, staring blankly at a pale wall, forcing himself to swallow tears so no one would hear. There were nights when he cried in the locker room after Knight's words cut deep, understanding they were born from expectation, yet still feeling their sting. And there were moments when he seriously considered walking away from basketball altogether, escaping Indiana, escaping Knight, escaping the shadow of failure that had trailed him since he was a child. But each time that thought surfaced, memories pulled him back. He pictured the West Side. He saw his brother Larry. He remembered his mother standing guard at the doorway, protecting her sons from an entire gang.